All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who may have just joined us, my name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar. And thanks for joining me today for preparing your team for CMMC, key roles and responsibilities. So during today's session, I'm going to cover first an overview of kind of where we are in the rulemaking process, and then how to define that overall system that you want to consider when you're doing, when you're building your policies around the system that you're going to define for CMMC, including those roles and responsibilities of the individuals that are overall responsible for that system. We're also going to show you how you can use Exostar's Policy Pro to build those, kind of those high level policies of how you're going to implement those particular controls or the things that you want to consider when doing that. Now, we're going to use Policy Pro for part of this, and we're going to show you a demonstration of that. David Rowe of ISMS is going to take over that piece of today's presentation. If you'd like to follow along while David does that, there is a free trial of Policy Pro available from Exostar. The URL is there. You can also find it on the Exostar website at www.exostar.com. If you look under the products pages, you'll see Policy Pro there. You can sign up for that free trial there as well. Just a few housekeeping details before I get started. So today's session is scheduled to last for 45 minutes to an hour, and that does include question and answer. Now, you're going to be muted during today's presentation. However, we did, when you signed up, we asked if you had any questions, and those are the ones I'm going to cover as part of today's presentation. And I think we got 5 of those submitted. So I'll cover those at the end of today's presentation. If for some reason we have an outage, just go ahead and refresh your page. If that doesn't work, go to your email and click on the link that you were sent when you registered for today's session, and that should bring you into where we are. Now, one of the questions we always get is, can I get the slide deck? Can I get a recording? Those kinds of things. You will be provided that as part of a follow-up to today's session. So it's going to be recorded. It'll be available on our resource library. We also have a YouTube page where we post these as well, but you'll also get this follow-up in an email. If at any time you'd like to speak with someone from Exostar, you can reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. You can also come to our website, www.exostar.com. There's a chat feature there on every page, and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions that you have via that channel as well. All right, so with that, let me go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, I'm joined today by David Rowe of ISMS Solutions. David, you want to say hi to the crowd?
Hi, everyone. Like Kevin mentioned, my name is David Rowe. I'm the Business Development Manager here at ISMS, and happy to show the platform and show how we can utilize the platform in order to quickly get CMMC compliant.
Thanks, David. And you'll be hearing from David when we dive into that demonstration of Policy Pro itself. But before we do that, as I mentioned, I want to cover kind of where we are in the CMMC rulemaking process. So as hopefully many of you know, 32 CFR went into effect on 12/16/2024. What that rule did is actually define the overall CMMC program. It is, if you will, what allows the DoD to implement the program. It also enabled you to actually now start those third-party assessments if you think you're ready. So you can now engage with those C3PAO organizations and get, that assessment if you think you're ready for that. There's still one piece of the rulemaking process that needs to be completed before it actually starts to appear in DoD contracts, and that's the 48 CFR. And CFR stands for the Code of Federal Regulations. That rule became a proposed rule on 1/15/2025. There's now a public comment period. The DoD responds to those public comments. It will then be finalized, and that's when you'll actually start to see it in contractual language. And we'll cover what that implementation plan also looks like in just a minute. But just some key notes about CMMC overall. What CMMC does, if you will, as a rule, is it moves away from a self-attestation that you're complying with NIST 800-171 and moves to a third-party assessment model. It also defines key terms about the overall ecosystem of cybersecurity compliance. It starts to define terms like cloud service provider, external service provider, etc., and what those providers need to bring to the table when you engage with them. Additionally, it tells you kind of how they're going to be assessed as part of your overall system security plan. Now, obviously, a new administration came on board this month, and that has resulted in a lot of new presidential orders. One of those is that there is a regulatory freeze currently in effect. What that means is the agencies need to review anything that has not yet been published before they go ahead and publish it. Now, this really shouldn't affect much of the CMMC program. 32 CFR is already in place, so it's not really under that regulatory freeze. 48 CFR isn't yet in place, so it's not really, it's kind of in a review period anyway. So though this may delay CMMC, we don't expect it really to negate it or have it go away. And the reason for that is CMMC has been in process for a number of years, including it was a program, it was being defined, et cetera, as part of the previous Trump administration. And this is a large priority of the Department of Defense, so we fully expect it to be put into effect. Now, when it does go into effect, this is what it's going to look like. CMMC defines 3 levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3. And with each of those different levels, you have different requirements, and they are wrapped around what you need to do around cybersecurity in your organization. Now, if you are the majority of the defense industrial base, you're only going to be required to be level 1, right? That's 63% of the defense industrial base. And in those cases, you're typically you only need to secure federal contract information, or FCI. In those cases, there are 15 requirements that you need to meet. You're going to self-assess that you do those things, and you're going to affirm that you would do those annually. Now, if you're an organization that receives controlled unclassified information as part of your contractual commitments to the Department of Defense, or because you're a subcontractor to someone that has those requirements, you're going to be either level 2 or level 3. If you're level 2, you need to align with NIST 800-171 R2. That's 110 controls, and once every 3 years, you're going to require a third-party assessment that you meet those requirements. Now, a small percentage of folks that receive CUI will also be in that self-assessment category, but that's going to be on a contractual basis. What that means is the contracting officer, when they put a contract out to bid, they're the ones who are going to determine whether or not the requirements for this contract are level 2 self-assessment or level 2 C3PAO assessment. And then there's the other category, level 3, and this and this is a small portion of the defense industrial base, right? Less than 1%. And this has 134 requirements. It's 110 from NIST 800-171, just like level 2. plus 24 additional controls from 800-172. And once every 3 years, you're going to require an assessment, but not done by a third-party assessment, one done by DIBCAC. And that's the assessment arm of the Department of Defense itself. Now, for all levels, a senior company official is going to have to affirm every year that you're still in compliance with these requirements, and you're going to have to, verify that you do. Now, we have this term called POAM that you see here on the screen. What that is a plan of action and milestones. That is what is used to manage the overall program. So if there's a particular requirement that you're not yet fulfilling, then you would create a POAM against that, a plan of action and milestone, to address that particular shortcoming of your controls. You would fix that. Now, if you are in the process of going through an assessment and that third-party assessment organization determines that you're not actually fulfilling that like you thought you were, if it is a control that's allowable, and there's just a few of these, then it's okay, and you'll have 180 days to close that control. You would, during the assessment, they'd flag it, you'd agree with it, they'd say, okay, let's create a POAM against that, a plan of action and milestone. You'll assign a person in your organization to be responsible for doing that. You got 180 days to close that. You then engage with that same third-party assessment organization to now come out, verify that you have fixed it, and that's when you get your passing assessment for your overall assessment. Now, when CMMC takes effect, right, we don't really know. There isn't a firm date that says this is going to be it. The DoD has outlined implementation phases, and it is, as you see here, right, a 3-year implementation program, where phase 1, that initial 12 months, is going to be what we have today, on a self-assessment of how you're doing against NIST 800-171. Phase 2, after that first 12 months, is when they're going to start to require that level 2 third-party assessments. And it'll be at the time of the contract. So if you bid on a contract with level 2, then you would at that time be required to be that third-party certification that you meet those requirements. And then 12 months after that, so 2 years after the first implementation, we then start to see those level 3 certifications be required. And then phase 4, after those first 3 years, that's when we would have full implementation of the program. Now, as you start to think about what you need to do, think about what you need to do today as well, right? If you're a current DoD contractor or a subcontractor to somebody that is, you have certain clauses in your contracts, or you have contracts in your clauses that have flowed down to you because that prime contractor that you work with has agreed to these things. If you've got those clauses that deal with controlled unclassified information today, that's the 7012, 7019, 7020 clauses, then you should already know about NIST 800-171. You should already be starting your compliance with those, because what 7012 says is, I agree that if I receive controlled unclassified information, I'm going to secure it in accordance with NIST 800-171. So you've already agreed to do this. Now, 7012 allows you to manage an overall program, allows you to implement those controls. If you don't have one in place, it allows you to open a POAM against it and work to close that POAM. 7019 clause says that I've done a self-assessment of how I'm doing against those, and I've scored myself. And I've scored myself using the NIST 800-171 Alpha, which is the assessment guide. And in the assessment guide, it has a point system for each of the different controls. You either get a 1, a 3 or a 5 for each of the controls, or right, a -1, -3, or -5. So your score when you do your self-assessment ranges somewhere between a -203 and a 110. Once you've done that and you've got that score, you're required to enter that score into the supplier performance risk system. That's the SPRS system. What you should do is, if you've entered that score and it's somewhere less than 110, you should have an open POAM against those open items. You should work to close those. Once you close those, your score will go up. You should then go into the SPR system and update that score. And all of this kind of lays that groundwork to what you need to do, what now with CMMC, because you should have a fairly good idea of where you are today, what you need to fix to get to that 110. And now when you get to that 110, you're going to have one more step. You're going to have to engage with that certified third-party assessment organization, C3PAO, certified third-party assessment organization, to come out and do their assessment of you and your compliance with those 110 controls. So it kind of all fits together. Now, as you start to look at your current system, right? Because this is all about creating that system security plan. And the system security plan is about the system that stores, processes, or transmits controlled unclassified information. So how does CUI come into my organization? Which of my employees or employee groups work on that information or get access to it or manipulate that information? When they're doing that, what tools do they use? Where do I store it while it's here in my organization? And if the contract ends, how do I get rid of it? So that CUI data flow, the different people in your organization, right? Those roles, responsibilities, who's doing what, that defines my overall system. Which people, which tools, and which processes touch that information define my overall system. And the best way to define that is follow that CUI data through your organization. Then as you do that, you're going to want to define, okay, so where does it go? Who's responsible for it? And it's not only the people that might be manipulating the information, it may be also the support people, right? So in your organization, you may also have to consider those individuals who are supporting your systems, because they may actually have access to those files and they may have access to the roles and responsibilities, et cetera. So you need to consider those folks as well. And then obviously, because you have people like a system owner or a system security officer or people who are responsible for the overall organization, those people also need to be the people that verify and assess your different controls to ensure that you are compliant. Because again, remember, every year there's going to have to be a yearly affirmation from your organization to your contracting body that you do these things that you say you do. And that has to be a company official. So you also have to define those responsible individuals who are going to do those sign-offs for you. And if you have a question about that, you really should talk to your contracting officer to determine who in your organization is going to be doing that yearly affirmation. You'll also want to work with those folks to determine those existing cybersecurity or other policies. Because what David's going to show you in a minute with Policy Pro is not only how you can create policies from scratch, but also how you can use Policy Pro to take a look at what you're currently doing, run those through Policy Pro to get a feel for whether or not you need to update, append, add on to, change language for, etc., to meet kind of the NIST 800-171 language. So when those assessors come out, they agree with those different determine if statements that are in each of those different controls. That'll also allow you to diagram the system, because when that third party comes out, that's what they're going to ask you for. They're going to ask you for, they're going to ask you for a system security plan. And the basis of that system security plan will be your data flow, your roles and responsibilities, and the diagram you use to say, okay, look, this is where we store, process, controlled, unclassified information. It's kept here. It's kept on these servers. It's kept in these file cabinets, whatever those things are. And some of these things may be maintained by folks outside your organization. You may engage somebody like Exostar and our managed Microsoft 365 solution, right? That is an external, or Exostar is an external service provider providing this FedRAMP solution, right? It's based on Teams up in GCC High, which is a FedRAMP service offered out by Microsoft. But Exostar is managing that for you. So those managed service providers, those external service providers, cloud service providers, etc., and what do you need and how they fit in your overall system. So all those things come into effect when you're both building those policies and determining within those policies kind of, okay, where do I need to tweak these, these overarching templates and things like that. So that's what we're going to do within Policy Pro itself. So Policy Pro is that centralized location that'll reduce the time it takes you to build those different policies for your organization. Offered out as a service from Exostar. So as NIST 800-171 may change, as different requirements may come into play, etc., it'll keep getting updated. It'll save these for you. If these things change, and they will change, it'll give you those things you need to change to comply with the new requirements. And as I mentioned before, it's also got that AI engine to allow you to take existing things, run it through, determine what you may need to change, and obviously keep these up to date over time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David and let him show you how this actually works.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, so as Kevin mentioned, I'll be showing you a demonstration of Exostar's Policy Pro. It is a SaaS-based platform designed to help you and your organization get compliant around the various requirements your business faces as you do business with the government, either directly or as subcontractors. So as he mentioned today, you are responsible, if you do have those DFARS clauses, to the NIST 800-171 revision 2, and therefore also the same CMMC 2.0 controls. In today's demo, we'll be walking through an example of level 2 for CMMC. Regardless of where your organization is in your cybersecurity journey, maybe you're just getting started out and you don't have any of these policies that we're talking about here today, and you have no idea what the 110 controls are. So you're kind of lost in terms of where to begin. We do have a tool and feature in the platform to help assist you with that with our policy building tool. And also for organizations that might be further along, maybe you already have all of your existing policies in place. It's still a great idea to ensure that you're covering everything you need to cover and that there are no gaps in your policy. And you can do that through our policy assessment tool. And the combination of those two features will ensure that when the time comes for those audits, for those C3 PAOs to check your documentation and check your implementations, you'll want to have those those policies readily available for the auditors to actually see what it is your organization is stating that your company is actually doing. We'll start off using our policy building tool here, and we'll start off with an access control policy example. And the first time through on the platform, you'll receive this pop up right here, which is a brief explanation of what policies are, as well as some of the other very important but ancillary documentation. For example, things like the gap assessment, the risk register, the POAM, which is that plan of actions and milestones that Kevin had mentioned earlier, as well as your system security plan or SSP. If you don't have those documents, we do provide some simple documentation here that you can download. If you need some further assistance, I definitely recommend checking out the companion product certification assistant, which is also part of that CMMC bundle that Kevin will talk about a little bit later after this demo. Moving on to the policies themselves here, you'll come to this prepare, gather, and consult page. This is everything you're going to want to actually prepare prior to even getting started writing the policies themselves. For example, it could include things like gathering your organization's documents, records, and other materials related to these various access control topics. Additionally, who you want to consult with, whether they are internal or external stakeholders. For example, it could include people like your network administrator, head of IT, or CISO, and then any sort of outside contractor if applicable. So that's that new definition of external service provider that can include your MSPs, your MSSPs, your IT consultants, etc. Once you have all that prepared, you'll go to our policy template, and all of our policy templates are broken out into a couple different sections. We've got the header here, which includes your organization name, the department or departments this policy will fall under, the issue date for when you finalize the policy, approved by, and the tracking number. The tracking number can be used in a number of ways. However, most people use it to keep track of the version number of the policy. So as you work on revisions and updates, you'll update that tracking number accordingly. The other sections include the purpose, the scope, and the individual practices. And this is where you're going to be spending the bulk of your time. So for level 2, again, there's 110 different practices associated with those 14 policy domains. And there's a couple key pieces of information here you want to take a look at before actually working on the template. So here we can see the practice ID number. In this case, it's 3.1.1. Next to that is the practice description for that particular ID. In this case, it's limiting information system access to authorized users. And then underneath that are going to be the guidelines. The guidelines will help you understand exactly what sort of information is typically included in that policy, kind of in plain English, as well as give you exactly what that policy should contain within the actual practice itself. To open up the policy template, you'll click on this pencil icon here located on the right-hand side. And that's going to bring up our policy for 3.1.1. So we can see that this policy is going to be about our organization's account creation, work from home, and bring your own device policy. A couple notes as you're working through these policies. One, you want to ensure that the entirety of the policy reflects what it is your organization has actually implemented. If there are certain things here that don't make sense for your organization, you want to modify it to fit your actual implementations. Or if it still makes sense to do for your organization, then you want to incorporate it, keep it into your policy, and then make sure that your organization is actually going ahead and implementing it. The other thing is there are certain sections that definitely you want to pay particular attention to and customize it to fit your organization's implementations. And we'll walk through an example here together. So it says all account creations will be submitted by the requesting department manager to the IT support email address for completion using the account request ticketing system or other process. So there, depending on whether or not you're actually utilizing a ticketing system to handle those account creations, if not, whatever other process it is you're actually utilizing, that's what you want to make sure to fill in that section there. Also, as part of what, to piggyback kind of off what Kevin was talking about earlier, in terms of the importance of roles and responsibilities, we can see here in 3.1.1, some of those roles and responsibilities are going to be defined here. So there are standard and non-standard accounts. We've created a sample list here. There could be certain ones you don't need to create if you're not utilizing them. Other ones you may need to create based on, again, your own organization's actual implementation. So you can certainly add or remove depending on the types of accounts that you're going to have for your organization. But it is very important to actually define those roles, define those responsibilities, to ensure that you're meeting the requirements for this particular policy. We've also added a number of enhancements and improvements. So if it's been a while since you've seen Policy Pro, whether it's a demo or a free trial of it, we've added some productivity as well as collaboration enhancements. As I mentioned earlier, you can add additional users to the platform, whether they're external or internal people within your organization. So, for example, if you are working with an MSP, you can add them to Policy Pro and utilize the comments and mentions. So, if you need some clarification on a particular policy aspect, you can comment and mention them, as well as some additional productivity features we've incorporated into our policy builder that you can access through these three dots right here at the top. Once you've made all of the changes you wish to make, you'll save those changes, and that's going to timestamp it, as well as who the user was that last made that change. And we've also added this version history as well. So this is another new feature of the platform. But what it's going to allow you to do is see all of the changes you've made and keep track of any of the previous versions of your policy, so you can see how your policies are changing and updating over time. One of the requirements of CMMC and generally best practice for any type of policy is a periodic review of your policy documents. And so one way to show evidence of the periodic review is to utilize a tool like Policy Pro to keep track of the version histories as you go through revisions, as you go through updates of your policy documents. There are other sections in 3.1 in access control regarding roles and responsibilities. For example, 3.1.5 talks about least privilege. And so least privilege can also be based off of those roles and responsibilities as well. So definitely want to make sure you take a thorough look at access control. All of access control is available even on the free trial to export. So if you want to get a head start on your policies, definitely check out the trial to make sure you're at least creating an access control policy to get started. As I mentioned earlier, once you've actually gone through and edited these policy or these practices, you'll then export this document, and that's going to do a couple things. It's going to actually combine all of the sections I mentioned previously. So the header, the purpose, the scope, and those individual practices into a single access control document that will then be saved to your local hard drive. Obviously, that's important to have several copies of your policies, both locally as well as on a cloud. And it's also an important step for the next feature of the platform, which is policy assessment. So, policy assessment is that AI tool that Kevin had mentioned previously. This is where you're going to analyze and assess your documentation to actually see where your gaps are and to remediate those gaps within your policy. You can also use this on policies that you've already created. So you don't have to go and create our policies from scratch. You can simply upload your existing documentation here into policy assessment. So we'll go ahead and upload a policy here together. As long as it's in doc, docx, or PDF, we're going to be able to assess it. Also, maybe you don't have an access control policy writ large, and maybe you've got several different policies that might pertain to access control. You can upload multiple documents as well. So maybe you have a separate acceptable use policy, maybe you've got a clear screen policy or password policy. Go ahead and upload any of the relevant documents for access control and submit it together so it can all be scored basically as a single document. Once you submitted it, you'll then see a couple different metrics, but you're going to want to click on this detailed scorecard to bring up this pop-up here. We assess your documentation in a couple different ways, both at a high level as well as a granular level. At the high level, we can see that this particular policy, the overall assessment is that it appears relevant in size, scope, and organizational customization. The overall assessment is comprised of three different metrics: the relevance, the model similarity, and the word count. The relevance is how many key terms or phrases are included in your policy. The higher that is, the higher the relevance and therefore overall assessment is going to be. The model similarity compares the policy you've uploaded to our model documents. And we do that for two reasons. One, to ensure it's been appropriately customized to fit your organization, as well as ensure it's covering everything it needs to cover. Finally, the word count is simply to ensure we have enough context surrounding those key terms and phrases to accurately assess your documentation. So if that word count comes out as too low, chances are your overall assessment and overall score might not necessarily be an accurate reflection of how your policies are actually doing. In terms of the overall score, here you can see my policy scored is 70.7%. However, our overall scoring is not like an academic score, so 90% as an A, 80% as a B. Our overall scoring is a relevant scoring system, meaning anything above a 50% shows you have a relevant document. And we'll talk about how you can use the overall score to gauge not just how your policies are doing currently, but how your policies are doing over time, along with the other metrics. So the overall score needs to be used in conjunction with some of the other metrics we're providing. In terms of, so that's kind of the high level overview. And we also provide that gap analysis in terms of what it is you're exactly missing in your documentation. And we do that through our key elements not included, or KENNY for short. We have two different types of KENNYs, both the control KENNYs as well as general policy KENNY terms. My first example here of a control KENNY is CUI non-public information. That is that key term or phrase that's missing in my document that I should be incorporating into it because it's actually required under the standard. And we provide you exactly which practice it's associated with. In this case, it's 3.1.22. The discussion requirement underneath here comes directly from the standard. So if you're not sure exactly how to address 3.1.22, you don't have to flip back and forth between the platform and the standard. We provide that for you directly here in the platform. The documents for examination are going to be other sorts of documents, records, or materials that your organization might have that can help you address that particular control KENNY as you're working on addressing the gap. It can also be used as evidence. So once you've actually incorporated this into your policy, once you've actually implemented it within your organization, you're going to want to actually show evidence, that body of evidence for that particular practice. And so these are some example documents that you can use as part of that evidence. The general policy KENNY terms are very similar in the sense that there are also key terms and phrases that are missing in my document. However, you'll notice there's no collapse all, expand all button with the additional practice information here. And the reason for that is these general policy KENNY terms are not tied to a specific practice. They're more generic to the policy domain you've uploaded to, in this case, an access control document. You can also export these results into a PDF as well. So if you want to save it to your local hard drive or share it with others who aren't on the platform, you can do that by exporting it as well. One last feature I want to talk about here in policy assessment is this management approval button. So I'll go ahead and click this here and we can discuss it further in the dashboard. The dashboard is where you'll come to see all your progress and work throughout the platform, whether you're creating policies using our policy building tool or assessing policies and policy assessment. All of that work is going to be captured here in the dashboard. Additionally, it'll show you your most recently management approved policy here in the green check mark, as well as who approved it and when they approved it. So one of the important aspects is that annual affirmation, as well as that periodic reviewing of policies. So you want to be able to show evidence that you're actually doing those activities, that you are periodically reviewing your policies, that senior officials in your organization are signing off on those policies, signing off on your implementations. All of those things can be tracked using the management approval tool in Policy Pro. And you'll be able to see any previously management approved policies here. So again, that audit trail, that body of evidence. And also ensures that everyone in your organization is following the most up-to-date policies. What you don't want to have happen is you update a policy and forget to let the appropriate people know in your organization, and they're following outdated policies for your organization. So this is one way to ensure you keep track of those things and ensure proper compliance. You'll also see all of those other metrics I mentioned previously, including the Kenny's as well as that overall score. So as you work on incorporating the Kenny's, you'll reduce those Kenny's down and you'll see that overall score trending upwards. Just use it as a trend line, and as long as it's above a 50% and your Kenny's are reduced down, you know that your policies are going to be CMMC compliant. Lastly, I do want to talk about our reference library here. So this is a good resource for you to use as you're working through the platform. Whether you're creating policies or assessing policies, there's going to be times where you need some additional information. And we've collected various resources and links across the web, mostly directly from the NIST Institute themselves on various topics. For example, let's say one of your Kenny's was related to VPNs or maybe mobile devices, and you're unsure how to address it in your policies, you can come here to the reference library. I do recommend this approach as opposed to trying to Googling for information. Chances are you'll either get outdated or inaccurate information. So it's best to get the most up-to-date NIST guidelines on those various topics through the platform. There's one last feature here. So in the support, as I mentioned, if you want to add additional users, you can come here into the accounts and be able to add additional users. They don't have to be users in your organization. If they are external to your organization, feel free to add your MSPs and your MSSPs to the platform. I hope that was a helpful demonstration about how to utilize Policy Pro. Again, policies are an important aspect to your CMMC compliance program. Without those policies, without defining those roles and responsibilities, the organization is not going to be effectively compliant with CMMC. And when it comes time for those audits, those auditors are not going to be able to actually audit you without that documentation. So Kevin does have a couple finishing statements, so I'll turn it over to Kevin now.
Great, thanks so much, David. Let me pick back up here. There we go. So as David mentioned, and I did earlier as well, Policy Pro is one of the applications that makes up Exostar's CMMC Ready suite. It includes a companion application, Certification Assistant, which really allows you to manage that overall CMMC program. It's where you can consolidate both those policies that are created in Policy Pro, the implementation statements you need for each of those 110 controls, answering those determine if questions for each of those different controls that you do those individual things, as well as put in the company evidence, the diagrams, the network diagrams, et cetera, that allow you to define that overall system, and really creates that one place where you do manage that program, including the creation of POAMs and things like that that you may not yet have implemented, or those recurring tasks that allow you to show evidence that you're doing, those required things, periodically per the requirement. Now, if you're looking for somewhere to safely store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information, Exostar has our managed Microsoft 365 solution. If you'd like to learn more about that solution, we do a 30-minute demonstration of that every Thursday. You can go to our website and sign up for that particular webinar as well. And then if you are looking to engage with somebody to do things like mock assessments or readiness assessments or help you with your overall CMMC program, Exostar has a number of third-party partners. They can work with you directly within these applications. So for example, as David mentioned, you can bring a third party into Policy Pro with you to tune those documents, to give you advice, or to actually do them as kind of an MSP kind of a relationship you might have. You can also invite those third parties into your certification assistant to help you manage that overall program, help you with a particular thorny area that you may not have any expertise in, et cetera. Or when you're ready to do that third-party assessment, Exostar includes in our partner list C3PAOs as well, so you can engage with them to do those assessments when you're ready for that to occur. Now, I did get a few questions prior to today's session, so I just want to cover those before we end today. So number one, what are the implications for non-US companies? So please understand that CMMC is a requirement of contracts with the US Department of Defense. It applies to both US and non-US companies. So if you have a contract with the US Department of Defense, or you're a subcontractor to somebody that is, you're going to get these contractual requirements to you. And these ones will tell you that if you receive controlled unclassified information, you need to protect it in compliance with NIST 800-171. You'll have to eventually also get that third-party assessment of how you're doing those controls. So these are for both US and non-US companies. So number two, my IT manager is independent. What other steps, if any, does this add to my CMMC compliance? So we have, there are a lot of companies out there that are contractual or what are called managed service providers or managed security service providers. They augment your IT staff, etc. These are those ESPs, those external service providers, as defined in the CMM scoping guide. When you're utilizing folks like that, they're going to be considered as part of your overall CMMC assessment. So if they have access to your systems, how you grant them access, how they come into the system, how they're related to it, what they have rights to, et cetera, are going to be considered as part of your overall scope. So if that IT manager has access to that server where you store, process, or transmit CUI, then they're going to be treated kind of as your staff for that. And how you let them have access, how they define it, that is going to be part of your overall system security plan. Now, it's going to be up to that independent contractor whether or not they themselves will, seek CMMC level 2 compliance. And the guidelines kind of spell that out. And then also if they utilize, third-party cloud services, then those cloud services, should be FedRAMP or FedRAMP moderate equivalent cloud services that they're utilizing or managing on your behalf. So when you engage with those folks, ask them these kinds of questions. They should have, kind of what typically is considered like a shared responsibility matrix. This is what I do. This is what you're responsible for, et cetera. maybe they're working with you on that overall CMMC program, and so they should contribute. If they're responsible for certain IT policies, then they should develop those, and they should develop those in accordance with NIST 800-171, and maybe that's part of your duties and responsibilities to them. So you gotta kind of manage that individual as as part of your overall CMMC program. So number 3, do you perform any preliminary or mock CMMC audits to make sure all our content in certification and policy pro are good to go? So Exostar does not, but this is where you can utilize Exostar partners to do those mock assessments or readiness assessments. There's if you go to our website, www.exostar.com, there's a partners tab there. Go to there, look under CMMC. You'll see a list of those partners. Now, most of those partners can be invited into Policy Pro and Certification Assistant once you've engaged with them. So they can, kind of tweak and work with you on those particular, within those particular applications to make sure you are ready to go. So number 4, is disabling split tunneling a must-do to comply? Now, the answer to this is no. For those of you who don't know what split tunneling is, it's like, so if you're utilizing a VPN for your company or to get to a particular application or things like that, split tunneling allows you to, if you will, break out of the VPN and go somewhere else. Companies often utilize this to allow people from their company to reach resources on their company intranet via the VPN, but if they're going to other sites just using the web, etc., they tunnel that, or that information goes straight out to the internet. Now, you have to think about what your policies are around that split tunneling. It is, what controls do you have in place to ensure those folks aren't getting malware, virusware, etc., from those sites that aren't part of the VPN? Do you have those things in place? Are you keeping their endpoints up to date with the right software and virus and malware, etc.? Because split tunneling does have additional risks because you are letting them access sites kind of, unsupervised, if you will. And so split tunneling can obviously be a benefit, but it can also just needs to be considered in your overall cybersecurity program. Number 5, what is the best way to enforce NIST policies on our team members? Policies, corrective actions, etc. Now, this is one of those questions where it really is about, how do we get people to go along with our policies, and it really is a combination of both, training and technology. Right. So you need to actually, train your folks on what is controlled unclassified information. How are we supposed to handle that? You should have those programs in place and document people's attendance and, and confirmation that they've attended those trainings. You should also have technology in place to ensure that, if you don't want them to remove CUI from, say, a central server or a service like Exostar's managed Microsoft 365, then you need to have the technology in place that says, well, don't download, don't allow folks to download this information from there. You can also then, enforce that with policies. You should have a written policy that says, we only allow CUI to be stored in this particular room, in this particular file cabinet. We have access controls around that. We train our people on those particular activities that they need to do. Our leadership is trained that on how to authorize individuals access to those systems and those kinds of things. So it's a combination of those policies, the technology that might be in place to both enforce a particular control like a locked door, but it may also be a control in place like video cameras on-prem to ensure that if somebody does break in, we know about it, right? And then we report accordingly. So there's a whole host of things, both at the policy level, the technology level, the monitoring level, that needs to be kind of layered in to that to address most of the different NIST controls. So hopefully that answered those questions for everybody. Now, this webinar today is one of a series of webinars that we do every month. We have, and actually, and some of these webinars are weekly. So we have product webinars focused on our certification assistant, Policy Pro like you saw today, as well as our managed Microsoft 365. But then we also have a general CMMC webinar once a month as well. Please come to our website, www.exostar.com, click on events, and you'll see a list of these that you can sign up for. You'll also see a list of these that have already occurred, that where you can look at replays and things like that. You can go to our YouTube page, look at the replays there as well. There's a whole host of additional information out there. I've got some available here on this slide, and as I mentioned before, you'll get this deck as part of the follow-up. Additionally, if you'd like to trial Policy Pro as you saw today, come to our website, sign up for that 14-day free trial there. Let us know if it meets your needs, and you can purchase it on the website as well. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your time and attention today. Hopefully everyone has a great rest of the day, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thank you. Have a great day.